I'm nearly finished.
Cool. How many have you done?
8.
That's a lot.
I know.
I was in 3. I didn't realise there was that many.
Oh, you're in more than 3. You just don't realise.
No.
You just don't realise that I was recording at the time, so that's fun. You don't, you're not talking in all of them.
That sounds so much more creepy than you might think it does.
Yeah, it was while you were asleep. Hang on, let me get my...
Was the tarot all in moment? Answer the question, what happens if I wake him? That's so freaky. Cameras?
There are. Well, this is our final episode, episode 8 of season 1. And for this episode, we thought we would try to bring a bit more of a serious nature to Magick. And we think it's probably about time that people ask the question, is magic, how's the magic we practice being appropriated from another culture? So for us, we believe it's a question that Western practitioners should definitely be asking. But before we get into that, we just want to first consider the terms witch and magic. So at Magenta, our dominant demographic for the people who work here is that of Western, white and cisgendered. So for us, we don't mind the terms witch or magic. In fact, we are so super keen to claim those terms back from the authors of that horrible book, the Malleus Maleficarum. No, I'm not saying that right. But the authors of that book used those terms to persecute people. However, not everyone who practices magic identifies as a witch. And in fact, in some cultures, we know that labeling sacred rituals as magic, it's actually quite offensive. And in fact, these labels of witch and magic are still sometimes used to justify violence against others. So, whilst from our white Western perspective, we are fine with those terms, we absolutely don't expect everyone else to be. And so we use these terms very carefully outside of the Magenta School, especially when understanding the practices of others. So, cultural appreciation or appropriation. So, what do we mean by this? Well, we Googled what is cultural appropriation, and literally there were pages and pages of slightly different yet samey definitions. So we went with this one, which was the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas of one people or society by members of another, and typically more dominant people or society. So we're going to use that definition for no reason other than, well, it came up first. So is Western magic culturally appropriated, or is it appreciated? Well, let's start with the moon. So the moon is a true icon of magic if ever there was one. Now, the full moon is considered to be one of the most optimal times to practice magic, or to have a ritual, or to work with nature. Now, most Westerners follow a Gregorian calendar, starting off in January and then finishing in December. And the full moon in any Gregorian month is usually, unoriginally, named after the month. So the full moon in January, January full moon. But for some cultures who don't use a Gregorian calendar or didn't historically use a Gregorian calendar, the full moon in each month has its own name, often drawing on the natural environment for naming conventions. So, for example, in North America, the moon's names, such as wolf moon or strawberry moon, so those were named after the various events of the season, such as when certain fruits were ripe or when the animals were calling out to each other. So these names found their way into Western cultures when Europeans came to the region where the indigenous people lived and started to use those same names. So it's always worth pausing to reflect on whether any names that we use to describe the full moon in a given month have been appropriated based on those historical factors. So what about magical correspondences? Well, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn took a lot of their teachings from practices such as Jewish Kabbalah and Middle Eastern and East Asian systems for alchemy and astrology. They use lots of deities from all over the world. And the Golden Dawn then drew up a table of correspondences from a whole mix of these practices and built them into the fabric of their work. Now, some of these original practices were shared openly. Others were taken through conquests, and some were just used because it suited the Golden Dawn to do so. The Golden Dawn then inspired other religions, such as Thelema and Wicca, who added in their own correspondences to their practices based on very similar methods of acquiring them. Then the New Age in the 1960s and the 1970s kind of piled on even more. For example, the Hindu concept of chakras was appropriated by the West in the 1920s after C.W. Leadbeater's book on the subject attributed 7 colours of the light spectrum and the human endocrine system to 7 of the chakras. So by the 1970s and 80s, Westerners started to use these sort of chakra colours for meditation and aura work. And in fact, right through to the 21st century, this idea of chakra colours is used in both a magical and a therapeutic non-magical sense. So it's all very complicated. So some of the magical practices that found their way into the West were shared freely by other cultures through the publication of ideas and knowledge sharing. So when these ideas were considered to be the accepted science of the day rather than magic, but certainly not everything was shared openly. Some found their way into the West as a result of conquests and colonization. and some were popularized through the media age and societal change. So the question of whether Western magic is appropriated or appreciated can get really complicated really quickly. But what about our magic? So here at Magenta, what are we doing? Okay, so the Middle Eastern systems for astrology and its intersection with folk magic was what first interested us in this question. Now, astrology as a practice is thousands of years old. It was probably created by the Babylonians, definitely exported to North Africa and Europe through conquests, and our astral magic comes from an Arabic practice, one that was shared openly when Baghdad was the world authority on the stars. So this is back when astrology was thought of as a science. But even this practice was translated from Alexandrian texts into Arabic. So it's really difficult to know for sure whether it was originally shared or taken. So at Magenta, we also like to use some aspects of Thelema and Wicca. But we didn't really understand the deities in the same way Wiccans would, and we really didn't feel connected to the Kabbalah the way those who practice Kabbalah might. So for us, it didn't feel right trying to connect to either of those religions. So once we recognised that having no cultural context to the words or the deities was the core of this struggle, we stopped. And we know that modern Wiccans do take bits from Wicca that they like and they just leave the rest behind. And that's exactly what we did. We followed that methodology. But we also conducted lots of research. For example, in our Magic Discovered course, we explain where our ideas and practices have come from. And we try to only use teachings from other cultures where we believe that this practice is open. For example, if we see something interesting, but our research shows that it's from a closed practice, we respectfully leave it. If we see something that our research indicates was shared by the original culture with openness, we research, we use the practice respectfully and sensitively, and then we absolutely credit where it came from. Also, this means that a lot of our magic uses source material rather than the potentially appropriated versions from later practices. Or we will explain when and if we are using a massively westernized version of a system. That said, of course, we know that there is more that we can do to improve our knowledge, even with our hundreds, if not thousands of hours of research. And so we encourage you to research where your practice comes from and only use it if it truly speaks to you, if it's open for you to use, and only use it in a way that it was intended, and then absolutely credit where it came from. So we don't mean to be a bunch of doomsayers and wag fingers at people. Honestly, that's not what we're trying to do. But we are so conscious that a lot of magical practice was taken, reshaped, most of it just literally made up, invented, made up by rich old white dudes who decided that that's how magic should be, without really asking any of the people that they took those probably very deeply rooted cultural things into the West. No, the original culture was probably never asked about whether that was okay to do that. So at Magenta, we're so conscious of that. We're trying to move away from that kind of practice where we possibly can. Now, it's not to say that people who traditionally practice one of those religions that was created by a rich white dude, let's be honest, from back in the day, that's fine. Everyone is free to do what they want to do. But for us, it really jarred that as a woman, as very sort of culturally aware people, we didn't want to be part of that system of perpetuating that that magic is okay, and I'm just going to carry on with that. So we stopped. We've pretty much moved away from chakras. We've moved away from some of the teachings of Thelema and Wicca, where it didn't suit us and where we thought that's not appropriate to do that. I mean, it wasn't at the time, but it's definitely not okay for some of those practices to continue in the way that they were originally designed. Now, we're not badging all Wiccans and all Thelema people with the same badge. We know that plenty of people out there are just like us. They've recognized that some of their magical practice is not appropriate and they've left it, and great. And we hope more people do that. And that's just how we feel about it. We don't want to be lectury, and we're trying not to be. We just want to be part of the conversation and part of the change, and we really welcome other people to be open to understanding where their magical practice comes from, researching where your magical practice comes from, and really question the ethics of that in a 21st century. And we welcome anybody who wants to have that conversation. Get in touch with us. You'll find all of our contact details at magentaschoolofmagic.com. And if anybody wants to learn a different way of using magic, which we think is probably more sourced from freely shared material, then by all means, come over to the school, come and learn how we do it. It's been based on thousands of hours of research, and we do label all of our research through the course material. So you'll have research papers in there, you'll have links to information about where our ideas have come from. And absolutely, we need to have this conversation more openly. More people need to be joining in with this and question everything. Absolutely question everything. If you take nothing else away from this first season, absolutely question everything. There's a lot of fake lore out there, people. So be open to having your world turned upside down by just bringing some of your own information in. Be open to it. And that's it. That's our show. That's it for season 1. And we're going to take a short break, and hopefully if this has landed well and been well received by you, then we'll be back for season 2, and we will see you then. So that's it. That's our show. If you liked it, give us a rating and review, share with others, tell your friends. You'll find all our contact stuff over at magentaschoolofmagic.com, including our social media and links to the Magic School itself.